Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Thriving Adoptees podcast. So today I'm delighted to be joined by Charlotte. Charlotte Laws, all the way from LA. She's got up early. She hasn't even walked the dogs yet. It's 7 a.m. where Charlotte is. Good morning, Charlotte. Nice to see you.
Good morning. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah. So when I looked at your bio, I thought there's two things that really stand out to me, right? And they were right down at the bottom. You said that other centrism is the key to happiness, and you also say that you love dead philosophers. And I thought, well, what's the key? What's the key to adoptees' happiness? What's the key to adoptees thriving and being happy? And does that have anything to do with dead philosophers? So what do you think is the key to adoptees' happiness? Because we see so much talk about trauma, and yeah, happiness seems like a long way away for a lot of adoptees.
Yeah, I think that that nature is very strong, as opposed to environment or nurture. And so I think that adoptees need to kind of examine who they are, and not necessarily in relation to the family who's raising them, and realize, Steven Pinker says that 70% of who you are comes from genetics. And that includes things like ideological views, predisposition towards political views or philosophical views or personality. And so I think that it's important to kind of, try to evaluate who you are. You may feel that you want to search for your birth parents. Some people want to, some people don't. And I think it's important to follow that intuition. And because your intuition really is very powerful and can give you a lot of information. And so if you want to search for those people, I think it's a good thing to do. And it's certainly a lot easier today than it was when I did it back in the 1980s, because of course you have adoption registries, you have the DNA websites, like 23andMe, and some states have open records here in the United States, although most of them don't. Most of them, the records are still closed for adoptees.
Yeah. So, because you had looking at the bio, it was a tough gig. Your adoptive parents was like, was it your adopted mother that committed suicide? Is that, if I remember rightly?
Yeah, it was and she didn't really just die right away. She was actually semi-conscious in a convalescent home for 10 years. So she had brain damage and she only had control over one side of her body. So she was in a really bad state for a very long time. And when it happened, my father, my adoptive father, who really was always verbally abusive, he told my little brother and me that we were never to mention our mother's name in the house again, and we were never to visit her. And it was extremely upsetting for my little brother, who was also adopted, because he was closer to our mom than I was. And he was only 14 years old. I was 16, so I could drive. So I had to sneak, we had to sneak to the convalescent home to visit my mom behind my dad's back. My dad filed for divorce immediately after she tried to kill herself. And so it was, we were sneaking around to visit her in the convalescent home. And my brother was just beside himself with hatred and anger for my father.
Wow. So was there a sense that the kind of that terrible stuff that you went through there, was that the catalyst for you, looking at the genetic side and the nature side? Was the nurture or the lack of nurture, was that so tough that led you to question the nature side? Or?
Well, I don't think I really thought about it in that kind of depth when I was a little kid, or a teenager. My brother was killed in a car accident 2 years after my mom, committed suicide or tried to commit suicide. And then I was also the black sheep, not only of the family, but also of the community. So I always felt like I didn't belong. My family was very racist. My community was largely racist. I was called an N lover almost every day at school by various people. And I supported the civil rights movement, and I didn't know people who did. They had very different values from me. So I think that, in a weird way, this very negative childhood ended up making me more independent and self-sufficient. And I got to the point as a teenager where I didn't really listen to, I really never listened to my parents very much, to be honest, anyway, but I definitely was very much only relying on my own opinion and my own values, and pretty much discarding everybody around me. And at a very young age, and could not wait to escape. And thank God for the TV, because the television is the only reason I knew that there were other kinds of people around the world who were different from the community where I was raised. And so I became very drawn to the entertainment industry at a young age, because I saw that they tended to be open-minded. They were very accepting of different kinds of people. And I loved their flashy clothes, to be honest. I loved those sequin dresses, which I was raised in a very elite debutante society. We were not supposed to wear things like sequins or rhinestones. We were supposed to wear the very conservative debutante clothes. And so that's another way I was very different from that community. So I kind of went from there. Other centrism, which is helping others, is basically fighting for a cause like civil rights or animal rights or gay rights or women's rights, or just helping, volunteer in a shelter, whether it's a human shelter or an animal shelter. Just doing things for others is what I've learned in my life really leads to personal happiness. And so I always advise people to do that if they really want to be happy, rather than sitting around, watching TV or, buying the latest little trinket and thinking that money is going to make you happy, or, being so absorbed in yourself that every little thing upsets you. Someone says something mean to you, who cares? Ignore it. It doesn't matter. You don't need to get revenge. You don't need to get all steamy angry about it. Just ignore it, go on with your life, and try to be an example, try to do good things for others, and that will bring you personal joy. That has been my experience.
That's been your experience. So the feeling you felt like fundamentally you never fitted in with your adoptive family, but you were that black sheep. Have you found you went into entertainment looking for those kindred spirits? You saw that on the TV. Have you found, has that helped you find your tribe?
Yeah, I started out really with teachers becoming kind of my substitute family. So I was very close to my teachers at school. And I have to say, I'm very happy that I went to a prep school, but I went to a very good school. And I literally went to the teachers' houses all the time. I was really good friends with a lot of them. And so they were kind of like parents to me. And then the entertainment industry became like a substitute family after that, which definitely made me feel like I could, I had a group to belong to, and they were very accepting, and mostly it was people in the music industry, which they tend to be very outgoing, and they're on the road all the time, so they kind of don't really have a rooted family so much. They have their family in every city, that type of thing. And then when I got to my mid-20s, I decided to track down my birth parents. And my adoptive father had told me that the records were destroyed, that everything was burned, everything was destroyed. And I didn't really completely believe him. So I decided to kind of pursue that information, which was extremely difficult because the records are closed in Georgia and there were no resources to help adoptees back in those days because we didn't have the internet, we didn't have any sort of resources at all. So I had to kind of use my party crashing skills, which I used to get to entertainment people, to make them my family. I had to use those kinds of skills to track down my birth parents. And it was, wasn't that easy. So I started out by calling the hospital where I had been born and pretending to be from a psychiatrist's office. I mean, it's the most ridiculous story. I can't even believe they fell for it. But I said that I was calling from this office and we needed to have the names of the female children born on this particular day at your hospital, because we have a patient who can't remember her name. She has amnesia. I mean, this ridiculous story.
Yeah.
And I was given 4 names. And so I wrote these names down, and then I kind of like tried to dig into my being to see which name might be mine. And I decided that the name Rochelle Wilpin, that must be the one it is out of the 4 names. And so I had already contacted the adoption agency, and they had sent me redacted paperwork. So it had big black marks over the names and addresses and all the pertinent information. And so I showed up in person at the adoption agency, and I met with this lady who said, we can't give you any information. It's illegal. It's contrary to criminal law and civil law, etc. And so I said to her, well, could my name be Rochelle Wilpin? And she was completely freaked out because she thought, oh my God, that's the wrong name, and she's going to find the wrong people and everything's going to be turmoil, right? So she said to me, I'm going to leave the paperwork open on my desk for 10 minutes. I'll be gone for 10 minutes. It's all going to be right here. Do you understand? And so I said yes. And she left the room, and I wrote down all the information off the paperwork. And my last name was really similar to Wilpin. I mean, really similar. And none of the names on the list were my name. And I later found out that my mom had given birth through the free clinic. And so that's why my name had not been on the paperwork, on the information I had received from the hospital. And so I had the names, but then I had to try to track down my parents. And my last name, my father's last name, was extremely common. His first name and last name, there are probably like millions of people on the internet with the same name, So, but they had told me that he was in seminary school studying to be a Baptist minister when he put me up for adoption. And so I knew that Emory University in Atlanta had a really good seminary school. So I called them up and I just said, I called the Alumni Association and I said, do you have any information for this, this former student? And they gave me a number for a professor. And that is how I found him. I called him initially. I told him who I was. He denied being my dad and hung up. And I just believed he was my dad. So I called him right back like 5 minutes later. And I said, I think you are my dad. And he said, you're right, I am. And that's how it all started.
Yeah.
So he was actually pretty easy to find, even though he had a very common name. My mother, on the other hand, was extremely hard to find, even though she had a very unusual name. Yeah. And it took me another 2 years to find her. But in the meantime, I did fly to my dad's city and ended up meeting with him. I went to the university where he taught. He's a history professor. And I was waiting for all these professors to come out of this meeting. And, there were lots and lots of people coming out, a lot of men coming out. And I immediately knew which one was my dad, even though I had no idea what he looked like or any sort of information. And I mean, he was a very good looking guy, which was kind of weird too. It's like, wow, my dad's really handsome, So I spent several days with him in his hometown, having lunch and hanging out and getting tours of the campus and this and that. His secretary was extremely suspicious of who I was because she kept seeing me with him, and I could see her eyeing us all the time, like, who are you? Why are you with him all the time? And so then we started this kind of long distance relationship, but he was extremely paranoid that his family would find out because he didn't want my half brother or half sister to know. And he didn't want to tell his wife either. His wife knew that he had been married to my mom and put a kid up for adoption, but he had never told his 2 kids anything about me. And so
Okay.
that's kind of how it started.
That's how it started. So I want to ask you about the dead philosophers stuff, right? Because you know, like this. The first thing is that people, you got out, didn't you? You know, like you get out. So the story is, you know, people. You hear this a lot in military people, right? So they were living in the projects in the US or in a tough part of the UK, and they saw no future whatsoever within the local environment, and so they got out. They went into the military and explored the world, which is an interesting one. In bearing in mind your philosophy, you know, so the British Army used to have a slogan, so join the army, see the world. And I used to think, well, join the army, see the world, and kill people. You know, it's they're not really doing it, you know. And I didn't go into that, funnily enough. That wouldn't be my thing. So you got out. You obviously went through a hell of a tough time with your dad, the death of your brother, your mum, and stuff like that. Instead of going in on yourself, you went out into the world. And your focus, if your focus is other centrism is the key to happiness, that's it. You're focusing, instead of focusing on yourself, you're focusing on others. So what's the stuff with the dead philosophers, and has that got anything to do with happiness? Because there must be more to happiness than just that serving of others. I mean, I feel that serving of others thing, you know, like that's one of the reasons I do the podcast, right? I want to share, interview people whose lives have been touched by adoption, find out what they've learned about happiness, about thriving, about leaving trauma behind, about fitting in, whatever it is, what they've learned. So my approach is a mixture of philosophy and spiritual stuff, I would guess. So what is it? How have dead philosophers helped? Why are you fascinated with dead philosophers? Who are they? Why? What's your fascination? I'm guessing it might be stoicism, but who knows? I don't know.
I think that you know, kind of determining what your essence is very important to feeling like a happy and confident person, you know, kind of knowing who you are. So, I mean, this is a very simple example, but you walk into a store and you see a pair of earrings and you say, oh, no, that doesn't go with my essence, or yes, that does go with my essence. I've kind of always done that. And when I was younger, and even when I was a teenager, like 13, 14 years old, I was reading philosophy and I trying to find a philosopher who had a similar view to my own, and trying to, you know, just, I think it really helps you when you explore philosophy or even explore spiritual books. It kind of helps you to find out who you are and what your belief system is, what your values are, what's important to you. And I think that is a very big part of happiness. And the philosopher that really spoke to me and still speaks to me is Baruch Spinoza, who lived from 1632 to 1677. He was a Dutch philosopher. And I had kind of always been searching for someone who had similar views to mine. And I took a philosophy class sometime in the 80s. And it was extremely weird because I was flipping through the book in this course on the first day, looking at the pictures of all these philosophers. And I saw this picture of this guy. It was actually Spinoza, the handsomest guy I'd ever seen in this picture, right? And so I didn't think anything of it. But then a few months later, the teacher started putting these ideas on the board. And I was super excited because I thought, oh my God, somebody with views like my own. And it turned out to be Spinoza, the same as the cute guy in the book. So that night I was talking to my girlfriend, my female friend in Orange County, who doesn't know anything about philosophy, didn't even go to college. And she said, "Are you dating anyone?" And I jokingly said, "No, but I have a crush on a philosopher who was born in 1632. And the next sentence out of her mouth was, "Oh, that's really funny. You have a crush on a guy who died in 1677. And I said, "Why did you say that?" And she says, "I don't know, because he did die in 1677. And so that was kind of like my first weird experience in my life. And it kind of cemented this connection that I had even further. But his philosophy definitely speaks to me. I definitely have the same philosophy. And so I think that when you do that kind of investigation through books, I think you can sometimes, solidify your own who you are as a person. And if you're adopted, it's probably even more important because you don't, the people who are raising you don't necessarily have the, that same value system, those same beliefs. And that's okay. You need to accept yourself for who you are, investigate who you are, and not think that you have to be the same as your mother, your adoptive parents, or your adopted, siblings.
Yeah. So, sorry, listeners, just dropped my pen there. That's not my profession. So the essence of who we are, you used. So how do you see essence? What does that mean to you in a sentence or two?
Well, I mean, a lot of times I call it the creative essence, because I think that your essence can change all the time. And I think that you're kind of creating it yourself because you're deciding the kind of person that you think yourself to be. So, you're a person who loves animals, you're a person who likes salad. Well, maybe next week you won't like salad anymore. That's okay. I mean, your essence, you can decide who you are, but you also are kind of examining what things are important to you. I think, just kind of a self-examination, and kind of something that you're always doing all your life is kind of examining who you are and what your beliefs are and how those beliefs may change or not change. But people, when they do studies, they do find that people essentially don't change much throughout their lives. They're kind of the same person from the beginning to end. And there are lots of really interesting twin studies and adopted children studies that, talk about how, genetics are so important and how you are kind of the same person from beginning to end. I mean, there are even a lot of studies about crime and how you can have criminal tendencies from genetics and, end up being adopted by a law-abiding family and then committing all these crimes. And then, like Jeff Landegren, for example, is one. He was adopted by a family. He was always had these criminal tendencies. He was always a problem for his adopted parents. Eventually, he murdered a couple of people. He was on death row. That's when he found his birth family. His birth father was on death row in another state. His grandfather had been in a shootout with cops and had been killed. And his great-grandfather had been a mastermind criminal. And his adopted sister said to the media, I think the day he was born, his fate was already sealed. So there are a lot of stories like that, which are kind of interesting, where you say, so that's, if you're an adopted kid who has an intuition that you don't want to meet your birth family, that might be a reason why you don't. You may intuitively think, gee, I'm not sure that they're going to be the kind of people I want to meet. And that's why I say you should go with that intuition.
But surely something that's essential to us doesn't change.
Well, I mean, I don't know that you could even pinpoint if you were trying to say that, what is a person's essence. I think that things are always changing. So I don't think that when it comes to a person's essence that you would say that is, stagnant. I would say that because I think that a lot of it has to do with self-interpretation, and self-interpretation can change from day to day. I think that probably the core of who you are is generally going to be the same. But as I said, you may change your mind about who you want to be, and you're affected by the environment as well, society and all of your experiences, those change you. I mean, that's 40%, or 30% according to Steven Pinker, you're, changed by your environment and surroundings. So, Yeah, I understand your point. The word essence is not supposed to change, but I think that when you're talking about a person's essence, I think it's a very creative enterprise, something that you are subjectively deciding to a certain degree, and that can obviously change.
Yeah, it's down to the vocabulary. So my view of our essence runs completely counter to that. So my view of essence of self is never changing. So to give you a take on that, what we do changes. So on the identity piece, there you are. So I'll make this. This might. I don't talk to many people about this, and normally it's like people go, "What the hell are you on about, Simon?" But since you're a fellow adoptee, since you've been talking about names, I'm going to try it. Right?
Okay.
So I remember getting I remember getting a piece of paper, whatever they call it. They called it an original birth certificate. It wasn't. It was just a piece of tatty, crappy paper that said my birth mother's name and my name. Right. So it said David Anthony Flower on it. Right. And she was Patricia Joan Flower. She knew that she was going to adopt me or have me adopted. The plan was done before the plan was in place before I was born, but she still gave me a name, which I thought was kind of interesting. So when I looked at this piece of paper, when I got this piece of paper, I don't know, I can't remember, 6-8 years ago, something like that. I looked at this piece of paper and I went, oh, I've had 2 names. Isn't that weird? And then a bit later, I thought, because I'm into spiritual philosophers, that sort of stuff. Oh, identity is my obsession, really. Yeah. So, curious obsession. If I have had 2 names, Simon Jonathan Ben and David Anthony Flower, I can't actually be either of them. They're just labels of who I am. So the essence of me is has no name because it's a label. Does that sound a bit wacko to you?
Well, what would you say is your essence? Because you got to understand that people, for example, we're always losing hair, we lose skin. I mean, we're always changing
that's our body. We're not our body.
Well, some people would disagree with you.
Yes, of course.
Spinoza would disagree with you.
Of course.
I would disagree with you. So It depends on if you're a dualist or not. So if you agree with somebody like Descartes, it's mind-body dualism, or if you're a person who actually is more of a materialist, which is what I am. So, you're believing, and you agree with my husband because he believes that there's a spirit. I don't actually believe that. So I have a different view. So you're saying that this essence is a spiritual thing that doesn't ever change. So what is it then? How do you describe your essence?
Well, spirit.
But are all people the same? Are all people the same as animals? Or all, how do you describe, is a human essence different than a dog essence? Are they all the same? Are they individualistic based on each person?
Well, you use the word duality or dual. So there's some of the guys I'm listening to at the moment are into non-duality. So everything appears, the essence of everything. So the materialist argument that it's matter first, and consciousness exists within matter. The non-dual approach is that everything comes from consciousness. So it's a consciousness first model. Consciousness first, material within consciousness. So in a metaphor then, so this is a Buddhist one, but it's non-duality is the essence of all religions. So we are the sky. We are the sky, and the clouds are our feelings and thoughts and bodies and everything like that. It appears within. Everything appears within the sky, with the sky.
They have done scientific experiments where they have discovered that people make moral decisions before they're even conscious of the situation. So in other words, morality is not coming out of consciousness. You're actually making these decisions before you're conscious of it. So I think it's hard to say that consciousness is the first thing, at least based on the scientific experiments that I've looked at.
Yeah, it depends how you use the word consciousness. So the usual, like I think of, conscious. Am I aware of it or not?
Mm-hmm.
I'm that's more like, yeah. Is it in my brain?
Mm-hmm.
The consciousness first model. It's a bit wacko to it. I'm just kind of getting into it, so I can't. There's a lot of debate going on, and basically all the scientists are coming at this from a material perspective,
Mm-hmm.
and the non-duality people are coming from a consciousness first approach, and
Right.
having really complicated, hard to follow conversations that I'm just kind of getting into it. But the essence of us, to put it in a completely different way, right? I saw my father-in-law who had died, and the essence of him had gone. The life force that animates him was no longer there. The essence of he wasn't him anymore. So identity as life force, as spirit, as the thing that drives the ghost in the machine, the
Mm-hmm.
thing that drives the body. That's kind of where I'm coming from, and I'm saying, oh, we're not our body. Well, it depends which way we look at it. So from one perspective, we are our body, but from another perspective, we are the animating force that drives our body. And it's and that's why I'm talking about getting to the essence of who we are. So how does that make any sense whatsoever within the adoption conversation? What the hell has this got to do with anything? Well, the adoption world and the psychology, the psychiatry word and psychology word is obsessed with trauma, right? They're obsessed with trauma. I believe that we should be trauma informed and hope obsessed. So I believe that essentially we are not our trauma. Our trauma does not define us. And the metaphor I use for this, I often use for this, and maybe listeners will have heard it before, but we haven't spoken before, so I'm going to explain it to you, right? So I'm holding a fist up to my camera on my computer and showing that to Charlotte. So the fist is my metaphor for trauma, because trauma often manifests as anger. That's how it has in my life. Adoption trauma or any sorts of trauma has so the trauma, my clenched fist, people hit, violence is often comes from trauma. That's why there's so much violence in prison. So, but if I open my fingers and unclench my fist, as I'm doing on the camera now, not a good one for audio, this, ladies and gentlemen, I reveal a glass diamond shape, a piece of glass that's shaped like a diamond. So this was £7, $8 off Amazon. If it was a real diamond, obviously it would be worth a lot more than that. But that is the perfection of who we are, the essence of who we are, the life spirit of who we are. So, and that is hidden. The essence of who we are is hidden by the trauma that we've been through. And everybody's obsessed by looking. Everybody's obsessed with the trauma, and nobody's looking at the perfection that's unhidden, that's hidden by that. And that's kind of my take on essence, where the trauma, the negative feelings, the negative thoughts that I've had, that everybody's had, isn't the essence of who we are. And I'm separating our trauma from us, and I'm saying the essence of us is hidden by the trauma in our heads and hearts. That's my
Yeah, no, I think that's very good. And I don't think it matters how you define essence, to still believe that you want to get away from the trauma, that you want to kind of examine who you are and let go of the anger and not, realize that that trauma is not who you are. I completely agree with what you're saying. I just don't think it matters whether you say that essence is fixed or whether it's something that's creative and something that's changing. It doesn't matter. You can look at it any way you want to look at it. But I do think that trying to examine who you are, I think that is going to help you get through those tough times and feel better about everything and be more confident in yourself and be able to move through your life and be a happier person.
Yeah.
So I think that's a good analogy that you have.
Thank you. So what have you, I went on a bit of a ramble, and this show is supposed to be about the guest's learnings, not Simon's learnings, right? So what have you learned along your journey that's helped you get to where you are now? Because you seemed like you went through some real tough stuff when you were a kid growing up. What is it?
Yeah, I mean, I think, as I said, I think you have to be, you kind of have to look at who you are. And I think you have to realize that when you're, feel initially angry or upset, you have to realize that the best kind of revenge is being successful. It's not actually getting revenge on somebody. It's actually just, being a successful, happy person. So that's pretty much always the answer to something that's upsetting you. And just trying to be a self-sufficient person and trying not to be petty. And, because when I was younger, I actually, would get upset about, for example, if a guy broke up with me, I would be very upset about that and crying and depressed for weeks, months. And I hated that about myself, because that was such a petty, stupid thing to be upset about. It's like, narcissistic. It's, self-absorbed. It's not, think about all the people and animals suffering in the world, people who are on their deathbeds or who are about to have their throats slit in a factory farm. And I'm sitting here worrying about a boyfriend dumping me. And so I spent like many, many years trying to get past that kind of pettiness. And I think I've really kind of gotten to a point where I don't do that anymore. I really look at the big picture. And I think it's important to do that. You say, this little problem may seem to be bothering you and niggling at you, but the truth is, look at the big picture. Think about the kids starving in, Asia, or, whatever it is you want to think about, and realize you actually have some good things going on and that your situation may not be as bad as others. And, have that hope. You were talking about hope earlier. Hope is really important, and be able to try to, change your life if you're not happy with something that you do. And that was something I didn't like, was being absorbed over stupid little petty things like a boyfriend, So I think that really helps.
That helps. So what was it that led to that shift in perspective for you?
I don't know that it was any specific incident. I just know that, I remember when my first boyfriend broke up with me, I was at Caesar's Palace in Las Vegas, and I went into a conference room, and I'm a very against violence kind of person. It's just horrific to me when things break, for example. But I took these glasses off a tray, and these empty little cheap glasses, and I threw them against the wall, probably like 10 of them. And to me, that was just horrifying that I did something like that. And, that's the kind of thing, like, no, I shouldn't have been doing that. I should be able to see the bigger picture, not be so self-absorbed to be all upset about this one little petty thing, and, try to just be more high-minded, I suppose I would say. And so there were incidents like that, there were no other violent incidents, but there were incidents where I would be depressed and in tears and upset. And I also, which a little bit is off subject, but I got to the point where I made up, this has to do with hope. I came up with an idea called the 3-step persistence plan, that when a guy breaks up with you, what do? You don't get upset. You start immediately trying to better yourself, and you set a date on the calendar at least 6 months in the future where you plan to coincidentally run into him again. And that's what I did with my husband. He broke up with me. I put a date on the calendar, and then I waited those 6 months while I kind of tried to lose weight and, get more successful and do things to better my life. And then I sent him a letter from an anonymous person. I drove a long way away to mail it, so the postmark would be unrecognizable. And I invited him to dinner at this apartment that was on the beach. And he showed up. And we had been broken up for 6 months, and we got back together that night. And then eventually he proposed marriage, and now we've been together for, 20, 30 years, a long time. So and the reason why the 3-step persistence plan is good is because it gives you that hope. It gives you don't need to be self-absorbed and all upset. You say, oh, in 6 months, I'm going to do this, and maybe it'll work out. And if it doesn't work out, maybe you've already met somebody else in the meantime, or maybe in 6 months, you'll say, okay, I'll wait another 6 months, so you've still always got that hope. You've always got that positive attitude. And that's why I came up with that.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah. Your persistence, as you say on the bio, persistence is the key to success. It seems like it could be a quite good middle name for you.
Yeah, persistence is very important, and you can really accomplish a lot more than you think you can if you just stick with it and keep plugging along.
Yeah. I was talking to somebody last week on a similar kind of, the word that I used was tenacity, actually. So usually that's seen as a good thing. And I said, well, I sometimes stick with things too long. Sometimes I'm over tenacious. That's what I think. I flog a dead horse. I don't move on quick enough. I'm not flexible, nimble enough, or something like that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I suppose so. But, when you're trying to do something, sometimes there's various angles you can come at it. So I don't know if you're doing the exact same thing over and over again and it's not working, or if you're, stepping back and saying, oh, wait a minute, I could go at it from this angle or that angle. So I don't know what is your example of something that you keep trying to do?
Yeah, I can't. It's too long a story. I was going to flip to. So I was talking to a fellow adoptee. I was sharing this with a fellow adoptee, and she went straight to it was. Well, no, she wasn't adoptee. She was ex-foster kid. She said, "Oh, well, that's because you're adopted." And I was going, I don't. She's drawing a line between two different things here. She's hanging my tenacity on being adopted.
No,
my gut feel on that was, okay, sit with this for a minute, Simon. Don't, my gut feel was, nah, she's barking. But then my next thought was, no, just stay open to it, and maybe have a look at it again. Not 6 months, right? Don't look at that. Don't look at this issue in 6 months' time, but just sit with it and see whether. And I'm thinking, nah, that I can't really see that. And then my next question was, does it matter? Just like, it doesn't matter. And so many times, a thing that pops into my head now is because I do a lot of episodes of this podcast with Thriving Adoptees podcast with adoptive parents, right? And I'm trying. Shout out, listener, if you're an adoptee, get in touch if you want to come on the show, because we need more adoptees. And I have made a massive shift in that direction. Like reaching out to you was one of the adoptees. So when I'm talking to adopted parents, sometimes they tell me, well, you know, like, is this an adoption issue or isn't it? And I'm thinking, does it matter? And then I say to them, does it matter? And they go, no, I don't think it does. And I go, yeah, I don't think it does either. I think you just have to deal with it. You know, whatever it is, you need to kind of move forward with it. And because otherwise we go down a kind of a rabbit hole of trying to look back to the past as to the cause, rather than looking forward to the solution. And it becomes we waste a lot of time and mental energy trying to suss the reason out for something when we won't suss it.
Right. I completely agree with that. You're completely right.
Yeah. It's one of the learnings I've come to fairly recent. It's fairly fresh for me. So yeah, and how much, and largely on, you know, I asked you a question, something like, so what helped you to that shift in perception, in perspective? And I think it was 2 or 3 different conversations where I kind of got a theme, and then something came together, and I just thought, Simon, how much time have you wasted on attribution, trying to find a reason for something rather than action, rather than, as you say, you know, you asked me, have you looked at different angles? Did you look at different angles? That's where my focus should be, looking at different angles rather than looking back in the past in terms of,
I mean, tenacity can come from environmental factors or hereditary factors. And for example, I don't know if this is a direct correlation, but I did find out my birth grandfather was killed by a devil worshiper in 1948. But he was an extremely tenacious guy. He was an attorney. He was going to run for Congress, and he was Italian. So there was a lot of prejudice against my family, which maybe has to tie into my fight for civil rights as a kid, being brought up in a very racist family. That's kind of an interesting link also. But he was kicked out of his house because the CC&R said no Italians, no Blacks, etc. He was kicked out of 2 law offices for being Italian. He was extremely tenacious, and he kept plugging along in this very dirt poor family. They had something like 8 kids, and you know, most of them were expected to go into the coal mines, and they could barely even feed themselves. And here my grandfather was, you know, had already become an attorney and was trying to really make great strides. So I don't know if I inherited any of that persistence, that perseverance, but I do know that that did come from my grandfather.
Yeah. Killed by a devil worshiper.
Yeah, it was, he was a neighbor, and my grandfather was representing his wife in a divorce. And it really had nothing to do with devil worship. He was a devil worshiper. In fact, he had an effigy of his wife, this creepy life-size doll that he would talk to, and he did all these weird things in his basement. But it had nothing to do with the death. He actually killed my grandfather, he killed his wife, he killed himself, and he set off 2 bombs in this small town. And I wrote a book about it called Devil in the Basement, which came out a few years ago, which is a nonfiction novel about the story. But it's really an amazing story. And I also learned that my great aunt, his sister, she was the mistress of Billy Jack Giacalone, who was one of the top mobsters in Detroit. And he is credited with probably being the person, according to the FBI, the person who killed Jimmy Hoffa. In fact, he kind of intimated that he was, or certainly he was present when Jimmy Hoffa was killed. So that's a sub story in my book, but another very interesting thing about my natural family.
Yeah. So tell us about your memoir. It's got the title Debutante in it. What's the title?
I have 2 memoirs. One is called Undercover Debutante, and the other is called Rebel in High Heels. And so the Rebel in High Heels story they're both completely different parts of my life. The Rebel in High Heels is the revenge porn story where I'm fighting this website, this nefarious website, to get justice for my daughter, etc. And it's also the first 20 years of my life. So it has the childhood with the adoptive family, etc. And then Undercover Debutante has to do with tracking down my birth family and, you know, all of my experiences from like age 20 to about age 40. And at the very end, I meet my brother and sister for the first time. And, you know, my father was very upset that I basically just kind of popped in and met my brother and sister because he didn't want, you know, to tell his family about me. But finally, I kind of forced it, and that was only a few years ago. So, so that's what that book is about.
Yeah. And it says on, if I remember rightly, it says on your bio, you're still in a great relationship with your birth parents. Is that right?
Yeah. I talk to my mom probably every other day, and she comes to visit, and she lives in Washington, D.C. area. And then my dad, I don't see as regularly, and I don't communicate with as much. I would like to, but you know, I don't really get over there to visit. And then my brother and sister, they are on social media. So, you know, I don't talk to them often, but sometimes. So, yeah.
That's good. I mean, because we so often we hear the stories that don't work out. And oh, I heard this. Somebody used this term. You might like this, being a you know, some your snappy titles. Have you heard this addiction? Sorry, reunion porn. Have you heard that phrase?
Oh no, I haven't heard of that.
It's good
What
though,
is
isn't
that?
it? It's good. You know, reunion porn. So yeah, but it's a good phrase, but it often it doesn't work out. So I'm delighted to hear that it has worked out for you.
What does it mean? Reunion porn?
Reunion porn is good question. I think it means it's a bit like success porn. So it's like reunion porn. I guess it's the showing the everything in the garden is rosy, the pot of gold at the end of
I see.
It's all going to work out. It's going to be the answer to your dreams. You're gonna reunite, and you know, here's my reunion story. So it's a sales device. Mm-hmm. In the same way as most things on the internet are a sales device. You know, you are be a happy adoptee. Be a happy adoptee. Be happy. Be a happy person. Are you feeling down? Are you feeling blue? All that sort of, like, bringing into people, playing on people's emotions and connecting with them where they're at, and saying, I used to feel just like you until I found X, Y, Z, and now you can read the story of what I do in my book, or you can buy the $1,000 online course on, you know, that to me, right. Reunion porn is kind of a bit like that. It's the kind of like, it's the far off dream. Everything's going to be okay. If only, you know, this is it always works out for their best. And people then, instead of being hopeful about the future, then they delay happiness. I'll be happy when, you know, this is the cultural thing, isn't it? I'll be happy when, in the Western culture, right? UK and US. I'll be happy when I've got a job, got a new job. I'll be happy when my kid graduates from high school. I'll be happy when my kid graduates from college. I'll be happy when I've paid my mortgage off. I'll be happy when I get my new car. I'll be happy when. And then for adoptees, I'll be happy when I get reunited. And instead of that sets us up for that sets us up for being sad at the moment and delayed gratification. So we're delaying being happy until we do. That's to me what reunion porn is.
Right. I did read once that the reunions with birth moms tend to be about 95% positive. I don't know if that's true, but I did read that one time. Maybe you have different statistics from that, but yeah. So I just don't know. But my mom is great. I mean, she's like, I mean, I just completely loved my birth parents the second I met them. I have so much respect for them compared to my adoptive. Oh my goodness, the complete difference. My father is like philosophical and deep, and he does charity work. And I mean, he's just super cool guy and very intellectual. And my mom is just super practical, and she's very smart with like current events. And, you know, she's a very unemotional person, which I think is very cool personally. My father is more emotional. My mom is much more stoic type of person. And, but she's just very practical. And I love that. And, you know, like one of my best friends said to her, right, you know, we were sitting, the three of us having lunch, and my friend said to my mom, it must have been so painful giving Charlotte up for adoption. And my mom said, nope, it was the best decision. That's what I felt I should do. And she just said it like that. And I just thought, that's great. My mom is so practical. I just love it. She didn't sit and harp on it and cry and freak out. And, you know, she went on with her life and had a very positive, upbeat life. And unfortunately, my dad was kind of masochistic. He was the one who said, oh, every time I saw a child, I thought it could be you. And I was in pain all the time. You know, so my dad was the one who was doing that kind of masochistic, you know, hating on himself, feeling guilty, you know, which is a shame, you know, but he's, you know, he's a very moral, religious person, and he kind of believes in, you know, kind of those Western values of, you know, kind of, you know, beating yourself up for making the wrong decision, that type of thing. I don't agree with him on that. So, but that is his way of doing things. So it was interesting, but I have so much respect for both of them.
Brilliant. So as always, listeners, I encourage you to check out the show notes. You'll see links to Charlotte's website, books, where she's on social. I know she's big on Twitter. So thank you very much, Charlotte. It's been a delight, and hopefully we'll speak again.
Okay, well, thanks for having me.
You're a star. Thanks, listeners. Thanks for listening, and goodbye. Ciao.